What are some disadvantages of being a man? Being considered a creeper by society while just trying to raise my little girl. Single dad of a daughter. And a really large guy. Hanging around playgrounds while she plays is a fun experience. Or Chuck E. Cheese. The non-existent invitations to playgroups. Oh, and let's not forget the school calling the non-custodial. Doesn't care to see her daughter more than every couple of months mother first about anything. Hair. Too much at the wrong places. Too little on the right ones. Baldness. While most men can't, certain men can make it work for them. You're automatically at fault in any domestic disturbance situation. Almost got arrested one night because I was just trying to get away from my blacked out, screaming then girlfriend. People expect you to pull it together at any situation. Constantly being suspected of being a sexual predator at the playground. It's utterly bizarre. But head over to AskReddit and you'll find it happens all the time. It hasn't happened to me in a couple of years. But in one notable example, I was with my 3 daughters at the playground. One of them fell down and scraped her knee. While I was comforting her and giving her a hug, a mom rushed up and got down on my daughter's level to ask where her mom was. I said, "Her dad is right here." The woman completely ignored me and kept asking my daughter where her mom was. I had to physically move to stand between them and repeat really loudly, "I'm her dad." Then the woman sort of apologized by saying, "Oh, I was just making sure she was okay." This sort of thing happens to dads all the time. I had COVID a week ago real bad and said my body aches hurt a lot and I was coughing up blood enough to go to urgent care, and the nurse suggested it was the man flu. If you are a victim of domestic violence, people won't take it seriously. People don't think that women can be vicious. Sexual harassment at work. I'm expected to just deal with it when a group of women in their 50s surround me and grab my ass. Besides, I enjoyed it anyway. Oh, did I mention those women are either in finance, i.e., responsible for paying my salary, or HR. Sometimes I just want a hug and a cry, but get weird looks if I ask my friends. Having to take the initiative, especially for shy guys. Almost always have to initiate. People who are supporting Russia in the ongoing war with Ukraine. Why? Remember, by controversial bois. Russian here, obviously against the war, but here's why I think some support it. 1. Propaganda is really good at abusing cognitive biases that all humans have. For example, there is a known truth in repetition bias. If a person hears the same bit of info over and over from multiple sources, after a while their brain just gives up and accepts it as fact. This is a blunt, brute force way to just feed an idea into people's heads. And yeah, it works. Would probably work on you too, dear reader. 2. Another thing propaganda has done a good job is fostering insecurity and cynicism. Making people feel like the whole world thinks Russians are second-rate and inferior. Thus, goes the reasoning, a show of force is the only way to make them respect us. Partially it's strong, deliberately fostered resentment, opening parenthesis, and a terribly ironic self-fulfilling prophecy. 3. A lot of people are grievously misinformed. Many arguments about the war boil down to, but how can you forgive X? What do you mean? X never happened. It was Y. Fuck you. Y is fake news. Quote, fact-checking is hard, especially in times of war, when many actors deliberately obfuscate information. Even Reddit regularly upvotes news that's been debunked. What, then, can you expect from less informed people with limited information sources? 4. Some people cynically believe that if they're to be reviled anyway, which seems to be the perspective now, it's better to be a reviled victor than a reviled loser. 5. Older people still think in terms of the Soviet Union. It's hard for some of them to process that Ukraine is a separate state. Not saying that's an excuse, you guys had 30 years. But that's just the reality. A country collapsing is not a trivial thing to process. 6. Russia doesn't actually have a, shall we call it, driving idea. It's a toothy neoliberal capitalist state with staggering income inequality and high levels of corruption that's built on the ruins of a state that promised and failed to deliver equality for all. That used to be a superpower and was very technologically and industrially advanced. But what are we now? What values do we bring to the world? Russia claims to cling to traditions. But what even are those? Slavic traditions? Russian Empire traditions? USSR traditions? Many of those are contradictory. It's a confused country that hasn't really figured out what it was trying to achieve. So, as loath as I'm to admit it, well, yeah, but at least fuck those guys too. Quote, logic sat all too well with some Russians. I also want to emphasize that I think much fewer Russians actually support the war than pretend to, and that the world chooses to believe. They're just all too used to the Soviet performative cheering of whatever the Tsar, party, leader, whatever is up to. Go to our Ukraine-Russia report. There are a solid handful of Russian supporters who post regularly. They will answer plain as day. Gotta love all the answers from the people it was meant for. Russian here. Can answer you why people are doing this. 1. One relative is glued to a TV, so much that he doesn't eat. Drinks coffee all day, and listening to propaganda all day long too. Second relative is afraid of NATO and behaves on this fear illogically. Like, we should defeat Ukraine. NATO will kill us all anyway. 3. Coworker is just stupid and IDK his reasoning. But ha ha ha. He's deeply scared of mobilization. I do not support Putler. But heck, people here make it really easy to think that all one is dead. Especially on world news. My Turkish barber was going off on one last time I got a haircut about how the US was the one stirring up trouble in Russia's neighborhood. People Reddit hates. Identify yourselves so we can harass you. As far as India is at play, I can say that most Indians recognize that the Ukraine war is wrong but support Russia due to India's long-standing alliance with Russia and previously the USSR. You can argue whatever you want in regards with Russia, but Indians don't have the same historic opinions on Russia, particularly because Russia was not a major power in the colonial race. The fact that many Indian freedom fighters were educated in Soviet universities led to India naturally having a Soviet tilt from its inception. The USSR gave India a lot of industrial expertise during the 1950s to 1960s. The USSR also helped India develop its resource extraction sectors in many states. Especially Odisha. My dad worked at a steel mill in Odisha. He lived in an apartment complex named after a Russian industrial instructor. He remembers that many of his seniors could read Cyrillic but couldn't talk in Russian. Vast amounts of weapons India has are Russian origin. Losing your largest weapons supplier is not really good news. Russia having no historic baggage of bad blood with India like how it has with almost every nation in Europe. The 1971 Western action in the Bangladeshi Liberation War against India, who was supporting Bangladesh, shaped a generation of Indian strategic thinkers to think of the West as enemies. I am pretty active on RW subs. And while there is certainly a lot of propaganda in regards to Russia, nobody in these subs are denying that Ukraine is unjustified in what it is doing. Most of the issue they have is that the West and its interaction with Indian neutrality is hypocritical, as most arguments they use can easily be deflected back using examples from most major Western conflicts in the past 30 years. No idea, but a coworker told me Putin is trying to save the world from a secret world order. The cabal. The Queen's death also was part of this theory. Other members were Elon Musk, Obama and Bill Gates. He also had some wild theories on COVID relating to that. In more seriousness, my in-laws are Russians. Either they just watch the national channel so propaganda, and the typical "the West is responsible for all our problems" chant, or they don't care about politics and go on with their day cause it doesn't affect them. You can't answer that on Reddit lol. It seems like the comments that actually do support Russia just gets downvoted to hell, so we can't even read any proper answers here. Way to ruin the thread, guys. How do you think the Ukraine war will end? With many dead people who had other plans for life. As do most wars. It will end poorly for both sides. Most likely Putin will double down unless the elites overthrow him. Russia becomes China's lil' bitch for the next few centuries. Sad but I think true. It will end like Korea. Ukraine will push the invader back, but there will only be a truce. Perhaps even just a de facto truce. Objectively, this will be a victory. Of course. But don't expect Russia to acknowledge it has lost. Putin is assassinated. Interim government withdraws troops and sues for peace. Reparations are a moot point, as Russia is left in an economic shambles. China invades Taiwan. In tragedy, there can be no good outcome. I think this will be a war of attrition. It will stop when Russia no longer has the ammunition, fuel, or manpower to keep going. Putin's death might end things. But I don't know who the next guy is or how desperate he'll be to maintain their gains in Ukraine. What comes next should scare the hell out of the Russian people. When they're sitting there with no means of defense, what's to stop some other eager nation, China for example, from looking at Russia's resources and say, that's a nice bit of land you've got there. It'd be a damned shame if someone were to invade. It's definitely not predictable. There isn't a full-scale war which involves a major superpower in 30 years, and both formation can become a lot more involved. It wouldn't be the first time a superpower lost a war against a smaller and weaker nation, or the first one where a nuclear weapon is used or a country is partitioned. Posted as a response to someone, but I think this relates to the entire thread. They will not use nukes. This entire war has been an unmitigated disaster for Putin. He thought Ukraine would roll over without a fight. He was gravely mistaken. The war, which he doesn't call a war, has gone on for far longer than he had intended. With Ukrainian advancements into Russian-held territory and the damage to their bridge to Crimea, it has been made embarrassingly obvious that Russia isn't as militarily strong as they and the rest of the world thought they were. The arrogance displayed and failure to end this war quickly have landed Putin in hot water in Russia. The public aren't buying his lies anymore and are fleeing the country in record numbers to avoid being drafted. The oligarchs that run Russia are getting itchy feet as they've been losing money due to the number of sanctions imposed by the West, their primary customers, which is being extended indefinitely due to the ongoing war. His attempts to annex the occupied parts of Ukraine is actually his first step to ending the war. Basically saying, look, I'll just take these parts that were loyal to me anyway and we'll call it a draw. Expect Ukraine aren't playing ball. They know they're winning. So what does Putin do? Huffs and puffs, reminding everyone how big and scary he is because he's got nukes. Important to remember that Putin invaded in order to take control of valuable gas and coal routes to Europe. Starting a nuclear war would be the last thing he'd actually want to do. I'm hoping something terrible happens to Putin. The rest of the people in the government wake up and end this. And Russia does all it can to rebuild Ukraine and then leave them alone. What's some good advice for an 18-year-old girl? Not everyone is worth sticking with. Choose your friends wisely. Thinking that every person who is nice to you as a friend is a big mistake. Force yourself to, for at least a little bit every day, to do things that you don't like to do but know that will benefit you in the future. You're never going to be liked by absolutely everyone. I spent way too much of my time trying to please everyone when it's impossible. I would advise you not to take the advice of most Redditors. Get into a pattern of healthy living and make it enjoyable, so you stick with it later in life. For example, exercise, eating right, good posture to avoid back pain, etc. I don't mean living like a monk and completely abstaining from alcohol, casual sex, drugs, etc. Just good habit. Don't put a guy's needs before your own. Don't ever get rides from unfamiliar people. With the exclusion of ride-sharing services, but only legit ones. Don't date guys that want to be rappers and don't get pregnant. Save your money. Learn to budget now. And whatever you want to spend on material items, put that same amount in savings. If you can't afford to do that, then the material item has to wait until you can afford to do that. Or look for another more affordable material item where you can do both. Start now to set up for your future. Build your credit. And look after yourself. Number 1. Respect yourself. Don't compromise on your boundaries. Respect your partners. Strive for financial independence. Stay humble. Opening parenthesis. Edit add smiley face. Learn to advocate for yourself. Guy here. If you have a male partner and are sexually active, do not give in to the blue balls excuse for doing things they can hurt. But he'll live, he will not die. Film snobs of Reddit. Who was the single worst casting choice in Hollywood film history? Pete Davidson. In that Taco Bell advert here. I dunno about worst of all time, but Julia Roberts in Michael Collins was super jarring. Her Irish accent was willy-nilly, and when it was on it was still pretty terrible. Plus she just looked out of place. Like they dropped a supermodel into the middle of the Irish Civil War. Not that there weren't good-looking people in Ireland at the time. But you shove a big name and face like hers into a historical period piece like that. You're just asking for trouble. Shoulda went with an Irish actress. Maria Bello in The Mummy 3. Replacing Rachel Weisz. It would have been better to say Evelyn died than to use Maria Bello. John Wayne as Genghis Khan. Justin Chatwin as Goku. The cast for The Last Airbender. The acting alone was enough to make it the worst movie of that year. I mean, I've seen better acting in Liberty Mutual commercials. James Corden in Cats. Any movie where Mark Wahlberg needs to appear intelligent. It can't be done without him constantly verbally reminding the audience how smart he is. Even then it doesn't work. I don't know about single worst. But when I think of terrible casting lately, I immediately think of Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. Those two leads were horrendously miscast. And it sunk the movie. Valerian with Cara Delevingne. She had no feelings and zero chemistry with the other main character, Dane DeHaan, who I've also never seen in another movie. Worst casting ever.